Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. A weakening economy? Nah, of course not. Persistent inflation? What are you, one of those MAGA conspiracy theorists? A possible recession in the near future? No, Jack, the strongest economy in world history. A possible liquidity crisis? What's known as a bank run that could lead to a possible bank run contagion? No way that's gonna happen, as Joe Biden tells us that banking and the banking system is safe.
Americans can have confidence that the banking system is safe.
Well, I struggle to accept pretty much anything that liar Joe Biden says. We've covered his track record when it comes to the truth endlessly. Not to mention, we know the government's response and reaction to the whole inflation crisis.
We take inflation very seriously.
Economists call all these things transitory effects.
There will be transitory impacts as it relates to inflation.
I believe it's transitory.
A temporary or transitory impact.
Talk of inflation. The overwhelming consensus is going to pop up a little bit and then go back down.
People fully expect this inflation to be temporary.
There's nobody suggesting there's unchecked inflation on the way. No serious economist.
The president's Build Back Better agenda as a whole will ease some of that inflationary pressure.
The bipartisan infrastructure deal and Build Back Better agenda could likely ease inflationary pressures.
It will ease longer-term inflationary pressures.
We're going to ease inflationary pressure.
No one's talking about long-term persistent inflation, Jack. Inflation is transitory. Well, if they were so wrong about inflation, why on God's green earth would I trust them on the bank run issue? Very simply, I don't trust them at all. And it feels like a possible bank run contagion might be right around the corner. We're getting a whole lot of information about these banks that are currently failing. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. So Joe Biden said, nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, folks. But so far we've seen 3 bank collapses in less than a week. Silicon Valley Bank, Silvergate, and Signature Bank. And to make matters even worse, we're getting reports now that Credit Suisse Bank, which is a major bank from Switzerland, is, quote, out of cash. The bank has run dry. Now, a week ago, people were sounding the alarm of Credit Suisse, and most of the talking heads, whether left or right, were saying you're crazy if you think that Credit Suisse is going to collapse. Less than a week later, the bank is broke. Credit Suisse then gets bailed out by the Saudis and is now getting a bailout from the Swiss National Bank. Now, this is the issue of a bank run contagion. It starts off with one bank, and all the politicians tell you that it's just an isolated scenario. It's a unique issue to Silicon Valley Bank, but the fact is that couldn't be further from the truth. Because while Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank might have been the most irresponsible in terms of their client money management, the underlying issue that's causing this liquidity crisis isn't solely unique to those 2 specific banks. Now, I'm not some hyper-educated economist, but I do have a basic understanding of what happened here. Essentially, the issue is that Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank and other banks like them are holding on to money from their clients like any bank would, but they don't just hold and keep cash, they have to invest it, and generally they'll invest it in safe investments like bonds, treasuries, and in the case of Silicon Valley Bank, they invested nearly $90 billion around 2021, essentially taking a bet that the Federal Reserve wasn't going to hike rates as aggressively as they did, even though Jerome Powell was saying that we're going to increase interest rates as aggressively as needed to tackle this inflation crisis. And so they took the majority of that money and they locked it up from anywhere from 3 to 4 years in long-term treasury investments. Well, see, here's the issue. If all of a sudden all the tech companies in Silicon Valley decide that they need cash on hand and they want to start withdrawing money from the bank all at once, then the bank is then hit with a 1-2, a double whammy. Not only did they buy these bonds at the worst possible time when interest rates were extremely low, but by exiting from that long-term position early, they're now forced to take a massive hit in order to meet the withdrawal demand. And essentially, this created the perfect storm for the entire bank to collapse. Now, this specific situation, these specific parameters, are not unique to Silicon Valley Bank. Yet Joe Biden is trying to convince you that that's the case, that it's an isolated situation, even though 3 to possibly 4 banks have already been affected, and there's most likely more to come. If you take a look at the balance sheets of most banks, even the Federal Reserve, they're sitting on massive amounts of unrealized losses. If all of a sudden people start losing their faith in the banking system, if people want to protect themselves and want to pull their money out of the banks, invest in gold, buy assets, whatever it is, or move their money to a much bigger bank or a bank that's perceived as safer, well, the more widespread this bank run contagion is going to get. And so we're in a very similar situation. Honestly, it's kind of how we got here in the first place. The American economy is facing a total economic and banking collapse. That is the reality, or at least that's a realistic threat. threat. And in the face of that, Joe Biden and the Democrats and most of the mainstream media apparatus refuse to accept that reality. They're distracting, they're giving excuses, promoting some sort of fairy tale, exactly like they did with the inflation crisis that we were facing over a year ago. Back then, as the economy started to reopen, there was a clear threat of inflation, but the prevailing mainstream reaction was, don't worry, Jack, inflation's transitory. That was the pervasive thought in the mainstream. And because of that, it seems as though a lot of major financial institutions literally took bets on the idea that inflation was simply a blip on the radar. It was transitory and that Fed wasn't going to be aggressive in tackling inflation. And fast forward a year and a half, now we're here. And when it comes to taking responsibility, well, that's pretty much going exactly how you'd expect. Joe Biden is literally, unironically blaming Donald Trump. Apparently what's caused this is Donald Trump cutting banking regulations in terms of how much money banks have to hold relative to how much they can invest, but that's a total scapegoat. With or without the regulation, these banks took a bet against inflation and they're losing. It has literally nothing to do with Donald Trump and everything to do with mainstream narratives and all the top players at these major financial institutions failing to meet the risk ahead. Now we're back to 2008, or I guess you could say post-2008. It's time to turn the money printer back on. No one's going to address the elephant in the room, the systemic rot of the financial system. The response is going to be as predictable as ever. More money printing and more bailouts. In other words, these banks are failing, and you, the American taxpayer, are going to pay for it. We're only starting to see the economic impact of Joe Biden inflation. It seems like the whole structure is collapsing. And that, my friends, isn't surprising in the least. This is exactly why I've been buying cryptocurrencies, gold, real estate, physical assets. What I find truly astonishing is that a random 30-year-old who records these stupid little low-budget videos at home, this 30-year-old who dropped out of college, somehow got it right, somehow saw the writing on the wall, from a year ahead of the inflation crisis to now. But all these major economists, the President of the United States and his entire cabinet, and these major players in the financial establishment, they all got it wrong, and somehow I got it right. Not to pat myself on the back and say that I'm a genius and everyone else is stupid, because of course I'm not the only one. I'm not saying that everyone else is stupid and I'm smart, but what I am saying is that the people that are in charge are certainly complete morons. Or they're just totally corrupt. They'd rather play politics and PR games, pretend like everything's okay, mislead the American public as the system collapses, because of course you know they're going to pull their money out before the whole thing comes tumbling down. They're going to remove themselves from the building before the wreckage falls on the American people. The writing's on the wall, the writing's been on the wall, and I really think that we are at the start of this possible major recession, what could possibly be a generational economic decline. But in the end, I hope I'm wrong. We'll just have to see what happens. That's what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.